Hernan Cortez is one of the most well-known conquistadors in history. The conquistadors were a group of men who were adventurers. They would go out, conquer lands, and colonize them on behalf of the Spanish crown. Cortez is most known for toppling the Aztec Empire, which was in modern-day Mexico. Cortez, when he was 18 years old, he got tired of his studies, so he left Spain for the New World, and he arrived in Hispaniola. He went on an expedition to Cuba with Diego Velázquez. Velázquez was very impressed with him and promoted him. But Cortez was not content. He ended up giving a mission to go and explore what is modern-day Mexico. However, Velázquez and Cortez would argue with each other sometimes. And Cortez knew, hey, there's a chance that Velázquez can change his mind. So he quickly began to prepare for this expedition. Well, sure enough, an old argument reemerged and Velázquez canceled the mission. However, Cortez was still committed to going, and he set sail with 11 ships and roughly 500 men anyway. Now, he put himself at dire risk by going against Velázquez. He was facing at least imprisonment, perhaps being executed for his insubordination. He set sail and arrived in Tabasco. He talked with some of the locals there and got some intelligence about the Aztecs and about Tenochtitlan, the capital of their empire. Then he went down to Veracruz, and from there he did something that I would argue he is most well known for. He sent one of his ships back to Spain, but for his remaining ships, he ordered that they be burned. It was his way of communicating to his men, there is no turning back. Look, we are not going to quit. Quitting is not an option. We're either going to succeed or we're going to fail, but we are not backing down. You've got to be all in on this mission. That level of commitment played a huge part in his success in eventually defeating the Aztecs and being able to give that land over to the Spanish crown. Now, you don't have to do much research into the life of Cortez to see that while he was a brave, courageous man, he was actually more interested in advancing his reputation, his career, than just about anything else in his life. The conquistadors could be incredibly cruel and did some terrible things. And so when you look at his life, it didn't seem like a very godly man at all. And some would say, well, Keith, that's quite an understatement. But the point is that he was richly rewarded for his commitment. Now, his lack of character would put him more in common with the degenerate kings of Israel. And, that's an unfortunate thing. However, in this video, we're going to actually be looking at a very good story, or a couple of really good stories in 1st and 2nd Kings. We're getting away from some of the just constantly depressing stories that we come across of Israel's slow slide away from God and his will. So we're going to be looking at the calling of Elisha and see how he was rewarded for his commitment, not for his own selfish gain, but his commitment for honoring the Lord. In 1 Kings chapter 19, the Lord commands Elijah to anoint Elisha as his successor. I'm going to do my best to try to pronounce them so that you can tell who's who in this story. So when Elijah happens upon his successor, Elisha is plowing in the field. There are 12 teams of oxen out there. So this suggests that Elisha comes from a very wealthy family. Elijah doesn't walk up to Elisha and introduce himself and say, hey, I've been on a long journey. I sure would appreciate your hospitality. And I have a very special message from the Lord for you. He doesn't do that at all. He walks up to him and he takes his cloak and he tosses it on Elisha's shoulders. And he keeps walking. Doesn't say anything. So Elisha has to leave his oxen and run after this great prophet of the Lord. And he says to him, first, let me kiss my father and my mother goodbye, and then I will come back with you. And then Elisha responds in a very cryptic fashion. He says, go back. What have I done to you? Well, he's actually done a lot. Your cloak, your mantle represented your power, your authority, your status. And so for Elijah to throw that on Elisha's shoulders, that communicates, hey, I want you to join me. I want you to be a part of my prophetic ministry. So Elisha runs back. But what he doesn't do is just, I think, as significant as what he does do. He doesn't go back to his parents. He doesn't go back to his siblings and to his extended family and to the elders of the community. I mean, you have to remember, this is a society where people grounded their identity in their membership in their family, in their tribe, in their community. People didn't just do things on their own. They expected to get the blessing of their family before they would go out and do things. But Elisha doesn't assemble them. He doesn't say, hey, I've been given this wonderful opportunity out of nowhere to be a part of this incredible prophetic ministry of this man of God. You've all heard of him, Elijah. Hey, this doesn't, necessarily fit into the plans that you all had for my life, maybe taking over the family farm at some point in the future, but it seems pretty promising. Maybe we should pray and fast about it. I mean, hey, what do you think about it? He doesn't do that at all. He is fully committed. He goes back and he slaughters his oxen and he takes his plowing equipment and he burns it up to use it to serve the meat. And he gives it to the people and they all ate. Then he comes back and he follows Elijah and he becomes his servant, his attendant. I think by going back and slaughtering his oxen and burning up his plowing equipment, that's his way of burning the ships. That's his way of saying, I am fully committed. I am all in on this new calling upon my life. That life that was defining me before today, it's gone. I am all in. I am fully committed to this calling that the Lord has put upon my life through his great prophet, Elijah. And then Elisha recedes into the background. We don't hear from him and we don't see him until 2 Kings chapter 2. By the time we arrive at 2 Kings chapter 2, years have passed and significant events have taken place since the time of Elisha's initial calling. The wicked king Ahab has been dead for years, and his son Ahaziah has died recently. Now, by the time we get to this second chapter, it is the very day that the Lord is going to bring Elijah to heaven in a whirlwind. And this great man of God, this great prophet of the Lord, and his servant are leaving Gilgal. And Elijah turns to Elisha, and he says, "Stay here. The Lord has sent me to Bethel." But Elisha said, "As surely as the Lord lives, and as you live, I will not leave you." So they went down to Bethel. The company of the prophets at Bethel came out to Elisha and asked, "Do you know that the Lord is going to take your master from you today?" Now I kind of chuckle at this a little bit, because in the Hebrew, it literally says, take your master from over your head. So why do I laugh at that? Because when Elijah is taken up in this whirlwind, he's literally going to go above the head of his servant. This doesn't come through in the English. Elisha responds, "Yes, I know it, but do not speak of it." That reply gives us a window into Elisha's heart, into his mind. This is not going to be a joyous day for him. He's grown very fond of his master, very attached to him. Then Elijah said to him, "Stay here, Elisha. The Lord has sent me to Jericho." And he replied, "As surely as the Lord lives, and as you live, I will not leave you." So they went to Jericho. We get yet another demonstration of Elisha's resolute commitment to his master and his calling. He's not looking to clock out early. He's not happy. He's not going to take this as an opportunity to leave early. No, he is committed, we will see, to the very end by serving Elijah up to the moment of his departure. So they went to Jericho. The company of the prophets at Jericho went up to Elisha and asked him, "Do you know that the Lord is going to take your master from you today?" "Yes, I know it," he replied, "but do not speak of it." Then Elijah said to him, "Stay here. The Lord has sent me to the Jordan." And he replied, "As surely as the Lord lives, and as you live, I will not leave you." So the two of them walked on. Why do you think Elijah has made so many repeated attempts to separate himself from his faithful servant? I don't know. I don't think anyone knows but the Lord and Elijah himself. But if I had to put forth a couple theories, one could be, perhaps this is some sort of a test to see, will my servant be faithful to me to the very end? Will he remain by my side? Perhaps. Another one could be a very human reason. Maybe Elijah is thinking, you know what, I know I'm about to be taken up to heaven. I'd like for this to be just a private moment, just me and the Lord. Again, no one knows. As the story picks up, we're in verse 7. 50 men of the company of the prophets went and stood at a distance, facing the place where Elijah and Elisha had stopped at the Jordan. Now, I think in a very Moses-like fashion, crossing the Red Sea, Elijah took his cloak, rolled it up, and struck the water with it. The water divided to the right and to the left, and the two of them crossed over on dry ground. When they had crossed, Elijah said to Elisha, "Tell me, what can I do for you before I am taken from you?" "Let me inherit a double portion of your spirit," Elisha replied. Now I got to confess that I have interpreted this request incorrectly my whole life until this past week. I've always interpreted it in a sense of Elisha was looking at the power of the Holy Spirit at work in his master's life, and he wanted a double portion of that potency, a double portion of that effectiveness. That's actually not correct. What was he asking for then? Well, I want to let you know, just remind you of something that you already know. We are in a privileged position. We have this literary omniscience where we already know what's going to happen, what's coming. We know that Elisha is going to go on and be an incredible prophet after the Lord's heart, okay? But he didn't know that. He was living his life by faith. He did not know what was coming. Look, we have no evidence in 1st or 2nd Kings that Elijah looked at him and told him, I just want you to hear me clearly. You're going to be my successor. There's no evidence of it at all. The only thing we know for sure is that Elisha understood his calling to be a loyal servant and attendant to the great Elijah. That's it. And so what is he doing? He's asking in a very Israelite fashion to be the successor of Elijah. And this tips us off. Again, he did not know that the Lord had already chosen him to be Elijah's successor. So he's asking for this as a request. I want to be your successor. Well, how do we know this? If you go back to Deuteronomy chapter 21, the Lord gives rules for inheritance. And when a father was getting ready to die, he divided his inheritance up amongst his sons. It did not matter. Now remember, this is a time of polygamy where guys had multiple wives. It didn't matter what wife gave birth to his firstborn son, whether it's one that he loved or did not love. The firstborn son was going to get a double portion of the inheritance. So I believe, and I've read in multiple commentaries, that they understand it as well, that what Elisha is requesting is to be recognized as the prophetic heir to Elijah's ministry. Verse 10, you've asked a difficult thing, Elijah said. Yet if you see me when I am taken from you, it will be yours. Otherwise, not. As they were walking along and talking together, suddenly a chariot of fire and horses of fire appeared and separated the two of them. And Elijah went up to heaven in a whirlwind. Elisha saw this and cried out, my father, the chariots and horsemen of Israel. And Elisha saw him no more. There he took hold of his own clothes and tore them apart. This signifies his grief. His master was gone. His master that he loved and cared for deeply, took pleasure in serving and being a part of his ministry. Now he's gone and he's sad. Well, the good news is Elisha saw Elijah departing. So that lets him know, I've inherited this prophetic mantle from my master. And we see a concrete demonstration that ministry has passed to him. Verse 13, he picked up the cloak, this mantle that had fallen from Elijah, and went back and stood on the bank of the Jordan. Then he took the cloak that had fallen from him and struck the water with it. Where now is the Lord, the God of Elijah? This is like a prayer, I think he asked. When he struck the water, it divided to the right and to the left, and he crossed over. Amen. What an incredible story. I want to make a few concluding remarks about commitment and calling. Now, when it comes to you getting a sense that God is calling you to do something, when you begin to discern that He's leading you to live a certain life, be committed to it. Be all in on living that life, in doing that task that the Lord wants you to complete. in the way that Elisha was when he received his calling in 1 Kings. What about calling? Well, in my experience, whether it's been in the church or in various seminaries, I think most Christians have an idea that calling is something that is singular, fixed, and unchangeable. I just don't think that holds up when we look at the life of Elisha. His life can be divided up into 3 phases. His first phase of life was being a farmer. Well, he's out in the field and he is plowing with oxen. Seems like he was committed to being a faithful farmer. However, the second phase of his life is that he had a distinct calling on his life from God through the prophet Elijah to be Elijah's servant. He slaughtered his oxen, he got rid of his farming equipment, and he was completely devoted to this new calling that the Lord had on his life. And yet, now he enters into a third phase of life, where instead of being a servant to a great prophet, he becomes a great prophet himself. The Lord's calling on his life moved from being a servant to a prophet to being a prophet himself. I think the Lord can do that in our lives as well. I know people who were called for a certain period of time to be a missionary. And sometimes missionaries get a sense that they've completed that calling and it's time for them to move on to a different work for their life. I know mothers who felt called to be the best mother and the best wife that they could be. And then their kids, children grow up. What then? Sometimes later in life, she can experience a calling of, you know what? I want to be the best grandmother I possibly can be and invest in the lives of my grandchildren so that they will grow up and be godly men and women. You could think of so many different examples, okay? But my main point is when we look at the life of Elisha, God's calling on his life evolves with time. And I think it's fair for us to consider that about our life, God's life, his calling upon our life evolving as well. So I want to leave you with this. Spend some time in prayer. Seek the face of the Lord and ask him, Lord, at this phase of my life, what are you calling me to? Be patient. Be faithful with what he puts in front of you until you get that answer. And once you get that answer, follow Elisha's lead. Be all in. Okay? Burn the farm equipment, burn the ships, and go all in on it. God bless you.